Hello, my name is Avra Haraka, fourth year classical singer, and this is my performance studies presentation, which is focused on a song called Madrid, composed by singer and composer Pauline Viardot Garcia. It was published in 1887, and the music is set on a poem by French author Alfred de Musset. The question that will be addressed is, how do Viardot's life, 19th century Western traditions, and Spanish culture inform the character and performance of the song Madrid? I am going to be performing this piece in my final year recital, and I am usually drawn to Spanish-themed songs. But what was really different about this one, and what really struck me, is that the text of the song is actually in French. So I thought that this would be a useful chance to take to research and understand the context that the piece was written in. The first publication of the song was in France, and this is where Viardot herself lived. So it can be assumed that this song was written to be performed to a French audience. Immediately, this raises the question of how much musical exoticism played a role in writing this piece, if at all. What was the intention, whom was it directed to, and what manner was it intended to be performed in? So in this presentation, I will talk about the three following key things. The woman, Pauline Viardot as a woman, a singer, a composer, and how she influenced others during her lifetime. Then, 19th century Western perceptions and musical traditions. So, for example, tendencies towards exoticism, which were common at the time, but also preconceived notions of Spanish culture. And then thirdly, I will look at the compositional style of Spanish folk songs, which is a very cultural thing. I then hope that this research will shine a light on how Spanish character lives within the music of Madrid, and how this character needs to be embodied by the performer when they sing this song. So when I started my research, the primary thing that was of interest is that Pauline Viardot was French-born but of Spanish descent. And this is of course of interest with regard to the specific song as it talks about Madrid. It is set in Spain, it has musical elements of Spain, but it is sung in French. Pauline Viardot's father was the foremost tenor at the time in Paris, and so she was taught piano and classical singing from a very young age, and also grew up in the company of distinguished leading musicians and professional artists. This is described in detail in a book written by April Fitzleon based on Pauline Viardot's life called The Price of Genius. Now moving on, in Madrid there is a lot of imagery of the female figure. The poem basically personifies the city Madrid as a woman and also speaks of another woman that the speaker is fascinated by and appears to love. There is a clear comparison and mirroring between them as they are both addressed as princesses. Right at the start, Madrid, the city, is called the Princess of Spain, and then continuously spoken to with the pronoun your, as if the city was a female person. And here we see how the speaker talks of the other woman, a beautiful woman in a long veil, and says that she is the princess, again, of Andalusia this time. This symbolism of the prominent Spanish female figure and of Madrid as a woman is interesting, as it can be argued that the poem perhaps spoke to Viardot because she recognized herself in it. Being one of the very few female performers and eventually composers who were believed to be outstanding and successful, she was prominent, and she was of Spanish descent. I think that Viardot's musical setting of this poem reflects a lot about her own personality and of her life. Due to her Spanish heritage, Viardot grew up with Spanish songs, but when she began her career, Spanish music was barely known in France, and so her performances of folk songs were considered exotic and have influenced other young composers. Austin Caswell writes in the Historical Anthology of Music by Women that Viardot was involved in launching the careers of Gounod, Saint-Saëns, Fauré, Massenet, and Berlioz, as well as various writers of her time. From that, we can draw the conclusion that she was aware of the influence she had upon others. I mean, on top of that, Saint-Saëns even says that her persona and her singing voice were of incomparable grandeur. This can be found in his own writings, translated by Roger Nichols in a book that I found in the RNCM library. From the research that I gathered, I found out that in the early years of exploration, the differences in culture were seen to be related with the differences in habitat. This is mainly addressed in a thesis about romantic exoticism titled The Music of Elsewhere in the 19th Century, which I came across, written by Josiah Reich. There is a discussion there on how, for example, Italy's and Spain's sunny, warm climates were linked to bright, positive personalities and themes, whilst areas with cooler climates were thought to bring out more reserved and skeptical characters. From this, I became aware that the perception of Spain in the 19th century was tinted, shining a light upon only the good, which of course is not the truth. In a book called The Spanish Song Companion, there is a great paragraph which says that there was an earthy fascination in Spanish music culture because it was more isolated than most and thus preserved intact. Spanish music relates effortlessly to the past. The writer later describes how we have all long needed Spain to add zest and color to our own sun-deprived cultures, but it is no longer good enough to treat Spain as an upmarket Disneyland. Spain is the land of mystery where there is dust of isolation. She argues that there is a failure from English speakers to really connect to the real Spain. Now, with this dark, deep, dusty, mysterious Spain in mind, I'd like to refer to the imagery in Alfred de Musset's poem that Madrid is based on. The imagery is actually colored with vibrant and dark visuals that contrast and create mystery. Descriptions such as angel against demon and the lively bird against the long-veiled widow show the juxtaposition of life and death, light and dark. Madrid is not just a wonderful starry city, but it also has its lingering darkness. This informs my performance by telling me that my voice needs to sing in a grounded manner, with a very low larynx, aiming to access low tones to match this dusty earthiness. Here is a list of images that reflect brightness and life versus others that are dark and earthy. Now the colors yellow and orange may be bright, but I've put them in a column in the middle because they are colors of fire, and fire is actually fearful and it comes from the earth. And then also carnival is in the middle because although it is a celebration, it is a masked and deceptive celebration and attains an atmosphere of mystique. So overall, there is a powerful imagery of a vibrant city with lively and passionate people, who are also dangerous and fearless too, like the gypsies and the toreadors who risk death. This contrast conveys the boldness of Spanish character, and so when a singer performs Madrid, they must create a sound that is bold and show the Spanish flair through a confident presence. Moreover, there is use of word painting in the accompaniment. There is a contrast between heavy and light pitches, mirroring the visual descriptions of Madrid. As a singer, it would add interest to respond and imitate these changes of color with my voice in order to further enhance the juxtaposing existence of these colors and further convey them to the listener. Moving along with my research, I came across some impressions and thoughts on Pauline Viardot's singing voice. There were no recordings of her voice, unfortunately, because there was no such equipment at the time just yet. A German poet who watched her sing said that she was not merely a nightingale, but rather that she reminded him more of a terrible magnificence of a jungle. Whilst in a biographical book, Barbara Davis writes that Viardot's charismatic presence commanded attention when she performed and that her voice was individual and unique. From Saint-Saëns's own writings, I found the following quote: "Her voice was enormously powerful with a prodigious range. It was not a velvet or crystalline voice, but rather rough, compared to some to the taste of a bitter orange, and made for tragedy and myth." Since Viardot had such a successful career as classical and operatic singer, I believe that this glimpse into what her voice was like is crucial in understanding also how she wrote for the voice eventually as a composer. I now would like to read out to you some fragments of Pauline Viardot's own personal letters that I found in the Musical Quarterly, in which she clearly expresses her dislike towards prettiness in music. In the first one, she says, "It attempts no pretty effects, heaven be praised." And in the second, she says that in Paris it is impossible for me to do anything satisfactory. I should have to sing bad music prettily. I hate prettiness in art. This insight into her thoughts and views, put together with the evidence of her own rather rough voice, further leads me to believe that this song should not be sung in a way that prioritizes lightness or prettiness. A sweet sound would simply not be suitable for this piece. Instead, a rooted, powerful sound with deep undertones would be more appropriate, and an attitude that is passionate and real. If the performer wants to echo truth, then there must be a glimpse of heaviness and struggle there. Exoticism was truly arising in music in the 19th century. There was an increase of interest concerning the transportive powers of music. The foreign began to have an allure to Western audiences because it seemed more exhilarating and appealing than their own reality. A slight change in timbre, altered harmony, or a texture shift could bring the listener all the way around the world. Through my research, I established that 19th century song literature was significantly less affected by exoticism than the opera and orchestral music. Lieder, melodies, and Italian art songs were much more nationalistically introverted genres. So Viardot, who often played and sang in multiple national styles, was really different, and she stood out during her time. Some examples of romantic exoticism in the 1800s include Liszt's Carpaccio Espagnol, Brahms' Hungarian Rhapsodies, and many of the great operas including Bizet's Carmen. Now, Bizet's Carmen is an excellent example of how grandeur was used in France at the time in order to draw in a crowd. Processions, palaces, dances were fascinating spectacles for an audience and led to the immense popularity of exotic operas in the 19th century. With that in mind, Alfred de Musset's poem is full of imagery of spectacles. For example, the bullfighting scene and the atmosphere of the crowd applauding and the carnival celebrations. In a book by Ralph Locke titled Musical Exoticism, Images and Reflections, I also found that ceremonies and exotic veiled, beautiful women also added interest. Again, this is present in Musset's poem through the speaker's fascination with a veiled woman. So it is very clear that the poem that Madrid is set on utilizes elements of romantic exoticism that were typical of that time. They were a way of evoking distance and talking of the otherness. The poem uses exoticism in a standard way of that time period. Alfred de Musset viewed the spectacles as foreign and as magnificent and as unusual. Now, the corresponding musical approach in exoticism would refer to Spanish elements occasionally in order to transfer to the listener a sense of this is a far-off land, really far away, with a very different ways of living. And so there would be some sporadic use of non-Western scales and harmonies, perhaps some textural shifts. However, in Pauline Viardot's composition for the song Madrid, the music is much more holistically Spanish. It does not simply infer a sense of Spain or Spanish culture, it is actually completely immersed and written in a proper Spanish compositional style. This brings us to these common musical features of Spanish song which I gathered through my research. The following list is a collection from various sources, books and essays that I've already mentioned, like the Spanish Song Companion, the chapter on Bizet and Spanish music, and the Musical Quarterly, and the thesis on Romantic Exoticism by Josiah Reich, as well as Ralph Locke's book Musical Exoticism, Images and Reflections. So to start off, Spanish songs were commonly in ternary form. Madrid's structure is A-B-A. There is frequent use of limping, syncopated meters, and repeated rhythmic patterns. More specifically, there is a predominant use of a 2/8 note rhythm. These 2/8 notes side by side almost resemble the sound of castanets, which were widely used in Spanish folk dance. Now I will play you castanets audio so that you can hear that resemblance with the 2/8 note rhythm. And on that note, it is important for me to mention just how interconnected Spanish music is with dance. And so, as a performer, it is crucial to have a sense of that intrinsic rhythm, respond to it musically and physically, and as a performer to be poised as a dancer and even use gestures. Now, this 2/8 note rhythm is used a lot in Madrid and in the vocal cadences and in the piano accompaniment, so here is a bit of an example for you to listen to that. This recording is from Claire Toomer on piano and Rebecca DuPont Davis singing. Elements of Spanish music include instruments such as castanets, vocal cadences, emulation of guitars, and Spanish dance forms such as fandangos. Now, the common use of these features means that Spanish people found them to be truly useful means of expressions, which is why they were favored musical elements. And so, Moments, like the vocal cadenzas, are heavily weighted with meaning and expressiveness. Therefore, the vocal cadenzas in Madrid need to be sung with emphasis and breadth in the voice because they are important and they behold meaning. There should be no breathiness, no lightness, but a richness in sound so that the emotion can be conveyed powerfully. It's important to attach a different feeling word to each cadenza so that there is a distinct color. So for example, for the first cadenza, which is on the word Spain, the feeling word could be wonder. So as you sing that cadenza, you're thinking wonder the whole way through. And for the second cadenza, which is on the word charge, for the bulls charging, the feeling word could be dread. And I will now give you a really quick demonstration of this. First, I will do the way that it shouldn't be done with the lightness and breathiness. And now this is the second one with the intent and thought of the feeling word. Now moving on to the next thing, in Spanish music the role of the guitar is almost more important than that of the voices. The instrument does not simply accompany the melody, but it sets and reinforces the rhythm of the dance, either by appropriate figures or by chord strumming. Its peculiar function is to mark the rhythm, never stopping. The guitar goes on without a moment's interruption. There is definitely emulation of Spanish guitar in Viardot's writing for the piano part in Madrid. This was pointed out to me by Russell Medley, who is the senior vocal coach and repetiteur at the RNCN. In one of my sessions with him in college, he basically said to me that the intro was exactly like a guitar, and I will play this intro to you. As you can hear, the tan taran taran really sounds like a guitar, but it is perfectly written for piano by Pauline Viardot. As a singer, the fact that the piano music is so much like a guitar and keeps driving through means that the driving energy of the accompaniment gives us a lot of space to breathe. Now, as it continues relentlessly, it feeds into our breath and energizes our singing as we perform. That continuing scale leads perfectly into the and really energizes the start of that phrase for us. Now, of course, it is also very noticeable that in Spanish music, melodies are conceived in the minor mode, and they often use the gypsy scale. There's a lot of chromaticism in Pauline Viardot's composition, and of course, knowing of their importance, the singer should really lean into the chromatic phrases and follow Viardot's hairpin markings. To conclude, Alfred de Musset's poem views Spain as otherworldly, exotic, and evokes distance. But this is where Pauline Viardot's musical interpretation really differs. The Spanish mood is not foreign to her, and so she composes an authentic and vivid Spanish song because she knows the music all too well. Pauline's compositional style blends Spanish folk song with Western tradition. The ensemble is purely Western, piano and voice, sung classically, not in a belted or gypsy manner, and the composition is Spanish at its core. Viardot's musical setting of Madrid does not create disparity in the way that romantic exoticism of that time did, but rather it unites Western tradition French melody with Spanish folk song very profoundly. It seems to me that Viardot wanted to make Spanish music, which was so comprehensible to her, also comprehensible to a French crowd. The French language of the poem made the song's story immediate and comprehensible, which in turn allowed the Spanish music to begin to become understood by them. Here's a quote. Viardot's song publications are an example of both the nationalistic influence on Viardot and conversely, her influence on national styles. This quote captures the intricate relationship that Viardot builds in her composition between Western and Spanish music and the close proximity with which she handles it. This, of course, needs to be considered by the performer, and so I think that Madrid still needs to be sang in a classical and Western manner so that it can really speak to its classical audience, but that the character needs to have a Spanish flair. Now, as a performer of this piece, it has been significant for me to discover that Viardot, when she composed this song, perhaps felt that she was reflected in the personified and female Madrid. The vibrant but dark, mysterious and complex city goes hand in hand with Viardot's unusual intelligence and terrible magnificence, which is talked about in every source that I read about her. Saint-Saëns talks about Viardot attaining this unique, strange, powerful fascination. What made her even more captivating than her talent was her character, certainly one of the most astonishing I have ever come across, he says. So knowing of that grandeur and strong influence and how she was exotic, the performer really, really needs to embody this attitude with an enchanting poise, enchanting facial expressions, and perhaps a few gestures referring to dance. The sound should be rooted and rich, and there should be a confident and commanding character present the whole time. This, of course, must not be caricatured or put on, otherwise, this will really, really just work against it. The singer must only do what they are comfortable with so that the primary thing is that they look confident. To step into this persona and to really, really be it, it would be really helpful for the singer to add action words to each phrase of the song so that there is an overriding emotion and thought ruling each phrase. So, for example, command, now enchant, mystify. This one, charm, dance, surprise. All of these actions and feelings relate really well to that character which we just spoke about, and they add structure and intent to the performance, which will of course enhance it. I would like to end by saying that Pauline Viardot can be considered an auto-exotic artist, and the composition of Madrid is an example of auto-exoticism as she has emphasized the distinctive features of her own culture to differentiate herself from the music of the area that she was in, which was France at the time. This means that the performer needs to know that they are not talking of the exotic when they perform Madrid. They are the exotic, as Viardot herself was. The singer needs to own the Spanish aura, and they need to perform this song as if the music is not foreign to them. You must regard the musical language as your very, very own when you perform Madrid. Thank you very much.